The views and opinions expressed in the following program are not necessarily those of Open Sky Radio. Please be advised.
Good day, everybody. Welcome to the Fire You Can't Put Out, broadcasting from the left coast today. My name is Melvin. I am your host, and I want to thank you for joining me from austerity to prosperity. We've got a lot to talk about today. But I want to start with what is the biggest news story this week that is getting absolutely no coverage in the major media. And it's unfortunate because the changes that are coming as a result of this decision will affect everybody, most of us negatively. Net neutrality. When I put together this show, I generally bookmark stories and then I return to them later on. I got a folder on my computer that I keep them in. And when net neutrality went before the courts, I marked it as a story that I wanted to talk about, but I wasn't sure how it was going to turn out. And at the time when it was in the court, I didn't really feel like I had anything to add to it. A couple months later, here we are. It was decided this week in a U.S. appeals court. This coming to us from Reuters. On Tuesday, net neutrality was struck down by a U.S. appeals court. The name of the case was called FCC v. Verizon Communications. The Federal Communications Commission says does not have the legal authority to enact the 2011 regulations. Obviously, there's going to be a lot of confusion about this. The FCC could appeal the ruling to a full appeals court or to the U.S. Supreme Court, or it could attempt to rewrite the regulations to satisfy the appeals court. During the oral argument in September, Verizon's lawyer said the regulation violated the company's right to free speech and stripped control of what its networks transmit and how. Here's what it is. The Internet is what's referred to as a common carrier. And the ISPs, the Internet service providers, those who bring the Internet to you, they can charge you for speed and they can charge you for capacity, but they can't charge you based on where you go. Verizon, hearkening back to another court decision, which was the Citizens United decision, which made corporations people, says that net neutrality limits their free speech. And so they should be able to say where you can go on the Internet. Just an example. Obviously, this is going to help Verizon and AT&T and other internet providers, but this is going to do huge things for your cable company. One of the best examples I have heard about this, Hulu was used as an example. So Comcast, I believe it's Comcast, owns 32% of Hulu. So what they are now allowed to do is if you want to stream Netflix, and by the way, your local cable company does not like when you stream Netflix. They don't like the fact that there are what are referred to as zero television households out there, which means they don't have cable and they don't have satellite. They just get what they can get over the rabbit ears, and then the rest of it comes via the Internet. Now they can say, well, if you want to watch Hulu, yes, we'll make that come into your house at a nice rate. But if you want to watch Netflix, that's going to cost you a little bit more. They can now say where you can go on the Internet. They can choose what to bring to you. It's no longer just an open pipeline where if it's on the Internet, you can get it. They can now charge you based on where you go. America, freedom, right? All those things. So, from a story by the Daily Kos, broadband providers will be free to provide faster download speeds to sites that they own as well as those which pay the ISPs for preferential access, which is to say to the companies, the internet sites will now have to pay internet service providers, pay ISPs if they don't want traffic to be slowed down to people that are getting there. Do you understand what I'm saying? It's okay. Basically, here's what happened. Congress specifically forbade the FCC from applying common carrier regulations to what the Telecommunications Act of 1996 calls information services. The FCC has said that broadband internet access is an information service. As such, the court ruled the FCC cannot provide common carrier regulations to them, such as non-discrimination and non-blocking rules. So, FCC is going to appeal the decision, and it could go to the Supreme Court. The rules essentially began changing with this when the internet was really, really starting to catch on. Part of the hallmarks of a Republican administration, and this was definitely true in George Bush's administration, is because the conservative idea is that government can't do anything right, that government is just doomed to fail, it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. George Bush put Michael Brown, who ran the Arabian Horse Association, as the head of FEMA. He had no experience in that area, but that didn't matter because Bush wanted him to fail. Okay, so Michael Powell was installed as the head of the FCC, and yes, the president picks that person. And by his own admission, Michael Powell, who is the son of Colin Powell, said at the time, and I'm paraphrasing here, this isn't a direct quote, that he wasn't sure what they did, but that he would do the job to the best of his ability. And of course, we know what happened with Michael Brown at FEMA during Hurricane Katrina, and then back when, and see, I was in broadcasting school at the time when Michael Powell was the head of the FCC, and I remember thinking about how strange that was, but I didn't know a lot about him. But the rules began changing when he was the head. Now, obviously, Michael Powell is no longer the head of the FCC. There's someone else in there now. Michael Powell has since gone on to be, you guessed it, a lobbyist for the telecommunications companies. And now, after all these years, we are left with this decision. See, the Telecommunications Act of 1996 completely deregulated the industry that I very much wanted to be a part of. I do this now because with the Telecommunications Act of 1996, it essentially deregulated the whole radio industry. There used to be a lot of rules about who could own what media in what town. You were limited to what stations you could own in any particular town, and that was to prevent homogenization for one, but also to provide local towns with stations that broadcast in the public interest. When that was deregulated, well, one guy can own 10,000 stations now, and he'll program them all exactly the same, and then, one town to the next, you really can't tell the difference. And of course, none of them are broadcasting in the public interest, and of course, they don't have to. So, is this regulation or is this deregulation? I would submit to you that deregulation brought us the climate, brought us the conditions, but this is essentially regulation. You're now being told, or you will be, if the decision stands, of course, and it can go to the president, it can go to the Supreme Court, and it can go to Congress. Nothing's going to happen in Congress. Those guys aren't doing anything. If it's not helping out millionaires and billionaires, and by the way, this decision this helps out the millionaires and billionaires, but it screws the rest of us. So Congress isn't going to do anything about it. So, but nobody talked about this week. Of course, Comcast owns NBC, so you didn't hear about it, even on any of the left-wing shows. Nobody's talking about it. It's just all of a sudden it's going to come as a surprise. You're going to get your cable company or your internet provider is going to start sending you information, essentially. It may not happen soon, but it'll happen soon enough. Will essentially start sending you information about what kind of internet package you would like to buy. That doesn't have to do with speed and doesn't have to do with capacity. It's just going to say, certain websites. You want to go to certain websites, it's now going to cost you more. Or they might just go directly to the companies and go, look, if you don't want the New York Times or the Huffington Post or whatever else to slow down when it goes into people's homes, well, then you need to pay us, the ISPs, more money. This restricts information, and that's good news for them. Please look up net neutrality. Please follow this on the internet. This is huge. This is mega. This is monstrous, and it's not being talked about in any of the major media. All right, let's get to the TPP. President Obama's international trade agenda is essentially going to be dead in the water if he doesn't do a better job of engaging with Democrats. Now, this is partially good news. Let me explain. The rest of Congress, obviously, much like the rest of America, has been cut out of the negotiations over the TPP, the Trans-Pacific Partnership. Quote, we want transparency. We want to see what's going on here, House Minority Leader Nancy Pelosi told reporters. Democrats in the House and Senate have complained for years, much like the rest of America, about the secrecy standards the Obama administration has applied to the TPP, forcing members to jump over hurdles to see negotiation text and blocking staffer involvement. In 2012, Senator Ron Wyden, Democrat from Oregon, complained that corporate lobbyists were given easy access while his office was being stymied, and even introduced protest legislation requiring more congressional input. So who is helping spearhead this deal? Senator Max Baucus, Democrat from Montana. Now, he's a Democrat, but he's a blue dog Democrat. And he has been working with the administration to fast-track the legislation. Once again, I would love to tell you what the TPP is and tell you how bad it is, but here is all I know, which is essentially all the rest of America knows. We don't know what it is. The Obama administration will not be open about what it is. And so folks such as myself on the left are definitely against it, and Tea Partiers are against it too, just because Obama's doing it. Who cares? Whatever it takes. But we have a trade deficit that has been over $350 billion for the last 13 years. Who stands to benefit from the TPP? ExxonMobil, Dow Chemical, Eli Lilly, because those are the same companies that used NAFTA in an attempt to overturn Canadian regulations regarding offshore drilling, fracking, pesticides, drug patents, so on and so forth. The TPP, I can promise you, if it were a good deal, they'd be talking about it. They'd be telling us why we need to get behind it, and it's absolutely secret. My mind is blown that the administration is actually considering this deal. And once again, I don't even know what's in it. Of course, folks will now turn to me and say, well, gosh darn it, you voted for Obama, now look what he's doing, screwing you. Really? Yeah, no, he is. He's screwing us all with this deal, but you can't tell me that Mittens would have done any differently. So, one of my favorite people, Noam Chomsky, who I've read a couple of his books, decided to get into the debate on this. Rather, he's saying that the TPP is about limiting regulation, helping corporate interests, and imposes fiercer standards on intellectual property. Once again, only helping corporations. On Monday, in an interview with the HuffPost, he said that the deal, which is not yet finalized, is designed to carry forward the neoliberal project to maximize profit and domination and set working people in the world in competition with one another so as to lower wages and increase insecurity. He called it a joke. He said it's being labeled as free trade, but it's a joke. Quote, these are extreme, highly protectionist measures designed to undermine freedom of trade. In fact, what's being leaked about the TPP, and some things have been leaked, indicates that it's not at all about trade, it's about investor rights. He, of course, is an MIT professor, and he noted, it is very hard to make anything of the TPP because it's been kept secret, a half secret. We say half secret, obviously, because we know that it's there. We just don't know what's in it. It's not secret from the hundreds of corporate lawyers and lobbyists who are writing the legislation. To them, it's perfectly public. They are, in fact, writing it. It's being kept secret from the population, which, of course, raises all of the obvious questions. So, here at TFYCPO, we are watching as closely as we can what's going on with the TPP, and of course, if that changes, we will bring it to you. Now, Congress, even though they're not being brought in on this deal, they can still torpedo it. They're not torpedoing it just yet. And of course, if it gets killed, it's going to be killed by the Democrats. Max Baucus, Democrat from Montana. Democrat in name only. He was the guy that held the healthcare negotiations way back when, you may remember that he said that the people who wanted a public option during those debates at that time don't get a place at the table. Yeah, he's a Democrat, but he is a blue dog. Actually, I'm not even sure what makes him a Democrat. I don't know that there's a progressive bone in his whole body. All right, so let's move on to what else is going on with the White House and Congress. President Obama said that he will veto any legislation enacting new sanctions on Iran. So it goes like this. We are now in talks with Iran about their nuclear program for the first time, well, essentially ever. And we had sanctions on them. We still have sanctions on them. And we're talking about lifting some of them now because they're cooperating with us on the nuclear program. By the way, nobody wants Iran to have a nuke. It's in nobody's best interest. It's not even in Iran's best interest. Okay? So, Obama and Kerry, the Secretary of State Kerry, have finally gotten them into talks. But Iran said, if you put any more sanctions on us, that will torpedo the whole deal. So naturally, some members of Congress, obviously mostly conservative, along with some few Democrats who will be named very soon, have decided that they want to go to war with Iran. In a statement released by the White House, Obama said imposing new sanctions would endanger efforts to implement the agreement, obviously. Quote, unprecedented sanctions and tough diplomacy helped bring Iran to the negotiating table, and I'm grateful to our partners in Congress who share our goal of preventing Iran from acquiring a nuclear weapon, Obama said. Imposing additional sanctions will now only risk derailing our efforts to resolve the issue peacefully, and I will veto any legislation enacting new sanctions during the negotiation. You can read Obama's full statement over at HuffingtonPost.com, but obviously, you know, I think the fact that we're even talking about this, not us here on this microphone, but the fact that Congress is talking about it, and the fact that the president has to make a statement like this, I think this, because this is a very public thing, obviously. We see this, they see this over in Iran. I think this kind of thing could potentially torpedo the deal. So obviously the Republicans are all for more sanctions because they've never met a war they didn't like. They've never encountered a war that they didn't like. But what about the Democrats? Well, there are one too many Democrats that are getting behind this deal as well. Bob Menendez from New Jersey, Chuck Schumer from New York, Ben Cardin from Maryland, Bob Casey from Pennsylvania, Chris Coons from Delaware, Dick Blumenthal from Connecticut, Mark Begich from Alaska, Mark Pryor from Arkansas, Mary Landrieu from Louisiana, Kristen Gillibrand from New York. We'll talk about her in just a moment. Mark Warner from Virginia, Kay Hagan from North Carolina, Joe Donnelly from Indiana, Cory Booker from New Jersey. Once again, we'll get to you in just a moment. And Joe Manchin from West Virginia. Booker and Gillibrand, and by the way, Booker was just elected. Booker and Gillibrand both have hinted at wanting to run for president. Now, let's call this the Hillary Clinton lesson. Hillary Clinton voted for the Iraq War. And so whenever the debate came up, when the war started going terribly, which I would argue went terribly from the start, fine. Some people call it a success. Yay, death. Okay, fine. But I would say that this could torpedo their chances. When the debate started really heating up over the war, and people were really disgusted that the war was going on, Democrats didn't really have a lot to say because every time a Democrat would stand up and say, well, this is a terrible war, should have never happened, they said, hey, Democrats voted for it too. And yeah, there were some Democrats that voted for it, and Hillary Clinton voted for it. And I believe that one decision, almost by itself, I can name a few other things, but they're not as strong as this was. The Democratic Party is by and large anti-war, and we should be. I say they should be. I'm not a part of that party. I suppose I caucus with them, but I'm not a Democrat myself. I'm a Democratic Socialist, a bit different. But I believe that war vote torpedoed Hillary Clinton's chances for president in 2008. I think we got two of the biggest things that gave us Barack Obama was the fact that Bush was president. After Bush, people were looking for something so completely opposite. We actually were able to elect our first African American into office. I believe that, the disastrous George Bush played a huge role in that. But also, Hillary Clinton, who, by the way, for as long as she's been running for president, rightfully I hate to say it this way because it sounds so entitled, but she almost had it coming. The presidency. She's been working at it for years. And when they were complaining about Barack Obama's got no experience, he can't be president, well, there's nothing in the Constitution that says you have to have experience, but you know what? She spent time in the White House. She spent 8 years with Clinton, who, by the way, is still a very well-liked president, but she couldn't get in. And I think that war vote stymied her, for sure. Speaking of Republican bad ideas, the House of Representatives passed a bill on Thursday, January 9th, overhauling the country's hazardous waste laws. Let me, real quick, I'll get back into the story in just a minute. And I should have said this at the beginning, I suppose. When I recorded last week's show, I have a calendar here in my studio. I turned and I looked at the calendar. I was taping on Saturday last week. I turned and I looked at the calendar, and it was the 11th, obviously, but I didn't feel like we were 2 weeks into the new year, so I kept saying the 4th, and I'm pretty sure I said that it was the 4th about 15 different times on last week's show. My apologies. Today, on TFYCPO, episode 52, we are taping on January 18th, Saturday. Okay, back into the story. I'll probably say that again later. The bill called the, follow me now, Reducing Excess Deadline Obligations Act amends both the Solid Waste Disposal Act and the Comprehensive Environmental Response, Compensation, and Liability Act, which is also known as Superfund. We'll just call it Superfund from here on out. It would remove requirements that the EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency, periodically update and review solid waste disposal regulations, and would make it harder for the government to require companies that deal with hazardous substances to carry enough insurance to cover cleanup. The bill would also require more consultation with states before the government imposes cleanup requirements for Superfund sites, places where hazardous waste is located and could be affecting local people or ecosystems. The bill passed 225 to 188, largely along party lines. 4 Republicans voted against it, 5 Democrats for it, essentially party line. Representative Cory Gardner from Colorado, the bill's sponsor, called the legislation common sense revisions of existing rules and regulations. Dun, 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 dun. The bill is obviously not expected to pass the Senate, and the White House has already issued a veto threat. So, that happened. Then West Virginia happened. I'm not sure how, well, it was pretty widely reported this week, but there is a chemical company who calls themselves Freedom Industries in West Virginia, and one of their chemical tanks began leaking, which killed all of the groundwater and made all of the water coming out of people's faucets undrinkable. They couldn't bathe in it. They couldn't cook with it. They couldn't do anything with it. Freedom. America. Right? That's what we were told. And as of this hour, today, they're still not able to use their water. So, what Congress thought, obviously, with that happening, is that we should have even more deregulation. See, this is the libertarian America. The idea is have no regulations whatsoever, right? No government involvement. You and I have no say in it whatsoever. And then when something bad happens, people will just not patronize that company anymore. They will stop buying from that company. They will stop supporting that company. So the idea behind self-regulation and retribution to companies who poison the air and poison the water, and with the libertarian idea is always after the fact, after people have gotten sick, after people have died, right? It's never ever to prevent it. So obviously, things still aren't cleaned up in West Virginia, and Freedom Industries has now said that, well, they're probably not going to pay for cleanup, and bigger and better than that, they're probably going to file for bankruptcy, which means guess who gets to pay to clean it up? Ladies and gentlemen, you and I. Deregulation doesn't help us, you and I. It doesn't make us safer. It doesn't make anything cheaper. It doesn't make our country more livable. But the idea is out there, and there's a lot of people that subscribe to it. And in my opinion, those people are not well educated, or they're just not thinking about things. They don't read. They've got no natural curiosity. I think that if we had a more educated populace, we wouldn't have to deal with that. At least not as much. There's always going to be somebody that will be in the hip pocket of the corporations, but for the most part, I think your well-read, very thoughtful people wouldn't subscribe to the idea that after somebody gets sick or after somebody dies, then we do something. Because obviously, like what's happening with Freedom Industries, even then, nothing is going to happen because they're just going to file bankruptcy and let the rest of us pay for it. So this came out this week. Tuition at public colleges came in, listen to these numbers, at $62.6 billion in 2012, according to the latest government data. That's less than what the government already spends to subsidize the cost of college through grants, tax breaks, and work-study fines, which comes to about $69 billion. It spends another $107.4 billion on student loans. That means, with the money it already spends to make college affordable, the government could instead subsidize public college tuition, therefore making it free for all students. This would not just mean that anyone could attend a higher education institution without worrying about cost, but it would incentivize private ones to reduce their costs in order to compete with the free option. So here's the thing. Government is spending a lot of money with loans right now, helping people with the cost of college, and it costs more than the actual cost of college. So we could actually spend less money than we're spending now and give everybody a college education. And what's wrong with that? Right? Well, there'd be less people voting for Republicans. That's what's wrong with that. So you get everybody an education, and that's good for America. Well, you say arguably, but no, it is. It's good for America because it makes us as a country more competitive. But once again, as we've stated on this show, the oligarchs, they need to keep the working class dumb, broke, hungry, and impoverished. That way they remain politically impotent. So obviously they're not behind the idea. But that's the next debt bomb. Total debt with respect to student loans, college costs, is over the 1 trillion mark. 1 in 8 of those student borrowers is now in default. And by the way, because of the bankruptcy bill that passed during George Bush's first term, I believe, they're not allowed to discharge that debt. You can discharge just about any debt, but you are a slave until you pay off your college loans. So, and with us shipping so many jobs overseas, a lot of folks will go into debt thinking that they'll get an education, they'll get a job, they'll come out, there's no job, and then, well, now they're on the hook to pay the money back. This, as a democratic socialist, obviously my idea is that the commons should belong to the people. Healthcare, infrastructure, and yeah, college. I think, now if you want to pay to go to some really high cost, really uppity institution and you've got the money, fine, then go. But I believe that everybody should be able to go to college at least for the first 4 years for free, for nothing. It should be subsidized by the taxpayers. Because when they graduate and when they join the workforce and they start paying, that increases the base, the money that goes to the treasury, which increases taxes, which, all these things just get better. But once again, much like with anything, water or prisons or the cost of college, if there's no way for someone to make a buck on it, then, they have to find a way. And so that's essentially what's happening with college. It's not working. It's really not helping anybody. All right. Let's get to the week in equality. Good news, bad news. Let's start with bad news. On New Year's Day, this comes to us from Addicting Info. On New Year's Day, during the Rose Bowl parade, a same-sex wedding took place on a float. I'm not sure how many people saw that. In the days leading up to the public nuptials, anti-gay activists whined and called for a boycott of the event. Okay, two men, Pastor Kevin Swanson and Pastor Dave Buhner, were discussing the annual Tournament of the Rose parade and festivities on their radio show recently. Ultimately, the topic of the same-sex wedding arose. Both Christians mocked the AIDS Healthcare Foundation by blaming gay people for the virus. Buhner asked, quote, "This is an AIDS group. This is a group that's against AIDS? They're not trying to spread AIDS, right?" Right. I mean, if you're trying to spread AIDS, you would have to be pro-homosexual propaganda, but if you're trying to stop it, now let that stick in your head for a minute. Pro-homosexual propaganda. That's what they call it in Russia right now. Okay. Then Dave Buhner suggested that anti-gay activists should be represented at these parades as well. Buhner wants to stone a gay person to death as the crowd watches. Here's the exchange. Buhner: "I wonder what the Rose Bowl parade would do if we had the stoning of a homosexual along the parade just as an expression of free speech and all that." Swanson: "I think that would be rejected by the Rose Bowl Parade Committee." Buhner: "Well, if the stones were just made out of flowers and flower petals." Swanson: "I don't know if they would allow that or not." Anyway, ladies and gentlemen, this is another instance in which the degradation of our society is going mainstream. Those homos, let's just kill them. I say that, obviously, tongue-in-cheek, but it's not funny. It's really happening. Over in Russia, where they have the propaganda, the homosexual propaganda laws, where you're not allowed to show support or any of the rest because you can go to prison. I mean, you show support for LGBT people, you can go to prison. The same kind of law was just signed in Nigeria. Nigerian President Goodluck Jonathan, which is a wild name for a man who just signed a very hateful bill, signed a bill on Monday that criminalizes same-sex relationships. The bill, which contains penalties of up to 14 years in prison and bans gay marriage, same-sex amorous relationships, and membership of gay rights groups, was passed by the National Assembly last May, but Jonathan had delayed signing it into law. This comes to us from Phoenix Onawa at Reuters. Under existing Nigerian federal law, sodomy is punishable by jail, but this bill legislates for a much broader crackdown on homosexuals and lesbians who already live in a largely underground existence. Britain and some other Western countries have threatened to cut aid, a threat that has helped hold back or scupper such legislation in aid-dependent nations like Uganda and Malawi. But they have little leverage over Nigeria, whose budget is funded by its $2 million per day oil output. I'm currently reading The Crash of 2016, and I'm just about to the end of it. And it talks about oil being a strategic resource and how it's time to stop making, for us to get away from it, for it to no longer be a strategic resource because we're fighting wars over it and all the rest. And then, of course, there's things like this that just put an even finer point on it. Quote, persons who enter into a same-sex marriage contract or civil union commit an offense and each are liable on conviction of a term of 14 years in prison. That's from the bill. Quote, any person who registers, operates, or participates in gay clubs, societies, and organization, or directly or indirectly makes public show of same-sex amorous relationship in Nigeria commits an offense and such each be liable on a conviction to a term of 10 years in prison. What I am doing on this microphone, just about every time I get on this mic, obviously, I've made no secret that I am a supporter of LGBT rights. Absolutely, outright, unequivocally. I just am. I don't think that there's anything wrong with being gay. I don't think it should be illegal. I don't think they should be stoned. I don't think they should be boiled or any of the other awful things that people are saying. But what I do on this microphone, when I say that, when I say we shouldn't be killing or discriminating against gay people, if I were to say that into this mic in Nigeria, I would go to prison for 10 years. As I'm here before you right now, I would go to prison for 10 years. For all of the talk about freedom, liberty, rugged individualism in the Republican Party. They are absolutely ecstatic when things like this get passed. There was a bill passed into law shortly after Bob McDonnell became the governor of Virginia. And that bill was just flipped on its head now that they have a new governor. That's Terry McAuliffe, who just won the governor, who beat out Ken Cuccinelli over in Virginia. So he's signed his first executive order titled Executive Order 1. It's the first thing he did. The order states the foundational tenet of this executive order is premised upon a steadfast commitment to foster a culture of inclusion, diversity, and mutual respect for all Virginians. CNN reported that McAuliffe also signed an order prohibiting himself, members of his administration, and their families from receiving gifts worth more than $100 and establishing a 3-person commission to enforce the rule. So this sticks a needle in the eye of Ken Cuccinelli, who, of course, was that state's attorney general, or actually, he still is he's not anymore. He's done. He's toast. Okay, because Ken Cuccinelli obviously is wildly anti-gay. But this sticks a needle in both eyes of Bob McDonnell, because Bob McDonnell, of course, was just about kicked out of office for accepting hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of gifts from Johnny Williams Sr., who wanted the governor to push a tobacco pill. There's a ton of coverage about it. You can find it all over the web. Rachel Maddow has covered it extensively. But now, so the anti-gay bill that was put in as soon as Bob McDonnell became governor, and of course this law, that was just implemented it's going to be implemented by Terry McAuliffe, their new governor, says there will be no more discrimination in the state of Virginia, and there will be no accepting of gifts. Boom, cleaning house on the first day. I love it. Okay, so we're getting into the good news on equality. Stick with me now, because it's not all bad. Okay, all right. So Obama has been picking judges now that the Senate has moved on the plan to stop Republicans from blocking every single person that comes forward. And he has been picking some good ones, some absolute barn burners. And well, this week, he's decided to blow all of our minds again. This coming to us from HuffPo. President Barack Obama prides himself on the diversity of his judicial picks. But on Thursday, he charted new territory by nominating Staci Michelle Yandle, who, if confirmed, would become the second ever out black lesbian federal judge. Wow. Obama picked Yandle, who has been in private practice for 20 years and runs an Illinois law firm, for a slot on the U.S. District Court for the Southern District of Illinois. She would fill a seat being vacated by Judge John Phil Gilbert, who is taking senior status on March 15th. Now, I didn't realize that this would be the second one. Judge Deborah Batts, nominated by President Bill Clinton, was sworn in as a federal judge in Manhattan in June 1994, and then, of course, she took senior status in April 2012. So that was the first one. Yandle said in a 2012 interview that the judicial world needs to be more accepting of the LGBT community. Quote, when I first started practicing for a while, I did not feel comfortable acknowledging my sexual orientation because I didn't want to lose my job. I wanted to be judged on my merit and my merit alone. Many members of the LGBT community still have that fear. We have a traditional profession that is conservative in many ways. So to the president, salute. I'm furious with you, President Obama, over the TPP, but I am quite happy with the judges that you are beginning to pick. I say beginning, but he's been picking them for a while. But, of course, the Republicans were blocking every single one. All right. So, let us get into our responsible gun owners. This first story I'm not going to cover a ton of because it's just been beat to hell in the news. But I did want to make make mention of it. So it goes like this: a movie theater, the previews are playing, and there's a gentleman. His name is Curtis Reeves, 71-year-old retired officer, is sitting in the theater, and he sees the man in front of him take out his phone and text somebody. And so Mr. Reeves says something to the gentleman who's texting somebody. An argument ensues. They stand up. The gentleman throws his popcorn at Mr. Reeves. Mr. Reeves pulls a gun. shoots the gentleman, and shoots his wife, and the father is now dead. This is the problem with guns. You make a permanent decision in a flash. The gentleman, the deceased, was texting his babysitter to tell him, or to tell the babysitter, to tell her, I'm assuming it's a her, can't remember, forgive me, that the movie was starting and he was going to turn his phone off, out of courtesy for everyone else in the theater. And that he wasn't going to be able to be reached for a little while, maybe check his phone periodically, whatever. He was texting the babysitter and then he was going to put his phone away, just like that. The cop saw it, flipped his lid, and decided that that man needed to die. Alright, so what they're trying to use as the defense, Robert Escobar is the attorney for Curtis Reeves. He's trying to use the stand your ground law, okay? Escobar reported that 43-year-old Chad Olson had thrown an unknown object, maybe a bag of popcorn, at Reeves. Okay, so Chad Olson is obviously the deceased, which resulted in gunfire, Escobar said. But Judge Lynn Tepper was not impressed. It may or may not have been popcorn, Tepper said. An unknown object does not equal taking out a gun, and it doesn't warrant taking out a gun and firing it at someone's chest. At one point, prosecutor Manny Garcia told the judge that after Monday's shooting, a woman had come forward to describe an incident at the same movie house in the town of Wesley Chapel last month. This involves the same cop. She was in the Cobb movie theater when she was confronted by the defendant for texting. So the ex-officer is really just out of his mind about texting. He doesn't like people texting in theaters. Garcia said that the 6'1", 275-pound Reeves had even trailed the woman when she went to the ladies' room in the midst of the movie, glaring at her the entire time. So they're trying to build a stand your ground case, right? And they could, because what the precedent that was set with the George Zimmerman murder of Trayvon Martin's walking down the street, Mr. Zimmerman gets out of his car, confronts the kid, a fight ensues, perhaps Trayvon Martin's getting the best of Mr. Zimmerman, Trayvon Martin is then murdered. Trayvon Martin had no weapons on him whatsoever and wasn't doing anything wrong before George Zimmerman stopped him. He was honestly just walking down the street. But George Zimmerman got away with murder for that because the stand your ground law says, yeah, you can start the fight and you get to finish it as well. I mean, it doesn't matter. Okay, so I initially thought in this case that they could once again use stand your ground because the ex-cop walked into the theater with a loaded gun in his pocket and a fight ensued, and then this gentleman threw popcorn at him, which is way more than Trayvon Martin did. And so I said, well, this guy is absolutely going to get off with murder, right? Mr. Reeves is going to get off with murder. Well, the sheriff just punched a hole in that. The sheriff who's investigating the fatal shooting of a moviegoer this week in Florida said the state's stand your ground defense doesn't apply in this case, even though his attorney, Mr. Reeves' attorney, said that it does. Pasco County Sheriff Chris Nocco dismissed the claim, saying there was no evidence of another object. It was an empty movie theater. If he was scared, why didn't he just move the seats? So, this guy might actually have to do some time for killing somebody, which would be good news. Let's get to responsible gun owners number 2. I live on the left coast. I broadcast from the Portland area, and it's called Multnomah County. And the Multnomah County Republicans recently raised an eyebrow with, follow me here, so today is the 18th, Monday is actually Martin Luther King Day, the 20th. And so the Multnomah County Republicans had a great way, tongue-in-cheek, to celebrate Dr. King, okay? From the MCP website, that's the Multnomah County Republican Party website, Portland, Oregon, January 13, 2014, Multnomah County Republicans recognize the incredible time of year that we're in. This is a quote. In successive months to start the year, we celebrate the legacy of 2 great Republicans who demonstrated leadership, courage that all of us still lean on today. Martin Luther King Jr. and Abraham Lincoln. Let me stop. I'll get back to this in just a minute. Abraham Lincoln was a Republican, but that was when the Republicans were a reform party and the Democrats were the pro-slave party. And Martin Luther King, when he died, he was defending union rights. This was no Republican. And even if he was, it definitely isn't the modern day Republicans. Okay, so back to the website. In celebrating these two men and the denial of rights they fought so hard against, the Multnomah County Republican Party announces that we have started a raffle for an AR-15 rifle, or the handgun of the winner's choice. The drawing will be held at our Lincoln Day dinner on February 15th, 2014. Tickets are once again $10 a piece or $12 for $100. There's a hard cap of 500 tickets in the raffle. Notably, both honorees are associated with gun violence. They were both gunned down. In fact, Dr. King was shot to death with a .30-06 Remington Game Master. And you know who the keynote speaker is to be at the dinner? Rafael Cruz, the father of Ted Cruz. Absolutely disgusting. They never cease to amaze me, though. Mikhail Kalashnikov was a small arms designer, and he's the guy who designed the AK-47 rifle. He died just before Christmas at age 94, and now it's come to light that the honorary Russian general repented for his contribution to modern warfare in a letter sent to Patriarch Kirill of the Russian Orthodox Church in May 2012. This is from a translation, quote, "The pain in my soul is unbearable. I kept asking myself the same unsolvable question. If my assault rifle took people's lives, it means that I, Mikhail Kalashnikov, son of a farmer and Orthodox Christian, am responsible for people's deaths." He's actually repenting about this weapon that he created. Like the man himself, obituaries of Kalashnikov agonized the AK-47's contribution to the death tolls of so much military conflict and the civil unrest throughout the past 6 decades. As early as 1989, Kalashnikov lamented the misuse of the most famous rifle design, according to the Smithsonian historian Ed Ezel. Since the Soviet Union's initial mass production of the rifle in 1949, more than 100 million AK-47s have been sold worldwide. The longer, quote, "the longer I live with this question drills itself in my brain. And the more I wonder why the Lord allowed man to have the devilish desires of envy, greed, and aggression. In the United States, most states permit the sale and purchase of AK-47s. To editorialize here for just a moment, I'm not entirely sure what Mikhail Kalashnikov thought the gun was going to be used for. And the fact that it became a weapon of war shouldn't surprise anybody. But the fact that he lamented and repented ever creating it, knowing that how many people it was going to kill and how many people it will continue to kill even after he's gone, it's pretty eye-opening. And I think that perhaps he was reflecting back on it because he was obviously a religious man and about to meet his maker and probably wasn't entirely sure, believing in the idea of judgment, what he was going to say upon meeting his maker. I'm glad he repented, but a lot of damage was done. Maybe he didn't set out to have so many people die by something that he created, but it happened. All right, so I want to get into Obamacare. I got into a back and forth today with a conservative on the page that I run on Facebook about Obamacare, and we actually ended up at a nice spot. We didn't necessarily agree on anything, but I tempered his coarse, rough language, his swearing and his hate. I tempered it down real quick and got him into a nice conversation. And I think that that's going to continue to happen more and more. Now, this comes to us from Daily Kos. Last year, Time published a massive special report, quote, titled "Bitter Pill: Why Medical Bills Are Killing Us." Okay, central to that story were Stephanie and Sean Ricci, an Ohio couple with 2 kids who had just started up a new business and who had just been struck by Sean's aggressive and expensive cancer. Quote, "I don't think Obamacare will help us. I don't want anything to do with it," Stephanie Ricci told the writer of this story a week after the launch of healthcare.gov on October 1st. Okay, obviously these people just absolutely outright hate the president. Okay, but she needed healthcare. Obviously, we all do, and that's the point I was making today. So she went to a health insurance agent. Quote, "When they came to my office, Stephanie told me right up front, I don't want any part of Obamacare," recalls health insurance agent Barry Cohen. "These were clearly people who don't like the president. So I kind of let that slide and just asked them for their basic information and told them that we could go on the Ohio exchange, which is actually the Ohio section of the federal Obamacare exchange, and show them what's available." What Stephanie soon discovered was a godsend. So from I don't want any part of this to it's a godsend. Here, quote, "Here I get full protection for $566 compared to no protection for almost $500, Stephanie says, referring to her old plan, which cost her $469 a month and covered absolutely nothing. People that say, I hate Obamacare and I'm opting out of Obamacare and my doctor won't take Obamacare, don't know what Obamacare is. At its most basic premise, it's just a set of rules that private insurance companies have to go by. You don't buy Obamacare coverage, you buy private for-profit health insurance, and then they have to abide by rules set in the ACA. That's what it is. Most people don't know that. I'll say it 1,000 more times, and people still won't get it. But the Obamacare enrollments are still at a really, really high pace. The Washington Health Benefit Exchange has had about 8,000 enrollments in private health plans since late December, bringing the total to just over 73,000. Quote, "We doubled our call staff in December to handle the high end of the surge," said Richard K. Onozuka, chief executive of the exchange, in a conference call arranged by the nonprofit healthcare advocacy group Families USA, "and we are almost doubling it again." Here's the idea. So with the website problems, there was obviously an anemic start in October or November, but after they got the website taken care of, things just accelerated, just went boom, especially at the end of December. And they said, well, it happened and it was great, but it probably won't keep up. But the numbers that are coming out now about the ACA shows that those numbers are doubling again and again and again. It's going through the roof how many people are getting coverage. Kentucky, who has a Democratic governor, Steve Beshear, has been an enthusiastic supporter of the ACA, obviously, and has been logging about 2,000 simultaneous users on its website in January. Yes, this month. New York is enrolling as many as 7,000 people per day this month, and California reports a tremendous amount of interest in the website. 6 states which are using the federal exchange, North Carolina, Michigan, Wisconsin, Idaho, New Hampshire, and Maine, are currently ahead of their target enrollments. Medicaid enrollments have accounted also for a big chunk of enrollments in other states. Furthermore, the pace of enrollments for the ACA is faster than it was for Medicare Part D, the last big federal healthcare expansion under the Bush administration, which, by the way, helped nobody. The insurance companies aren't panicking, and if you ask them, they're saying that things are going just fine. So I'm reading, I'm at the very end. Tonight I'll read the last couple of pages, but I'm essentially finished reading the book, The Crash of 2016 by Tom Hartman. And there's a couple of hallmarks that he mentions in the book. Watch for this, watch for this, watch for this. And actually it seems that, unfortunately, we are on par with a lot of those things that he's making mention of. And one of them just came true just recently. The mortgage market has essentially just cratered. The mortgage market cratered in the fourth quarter of 2013. Wells Fargo, JP Morgan Chase reported on Tuesday as higher interest rates all but murdered demand for mortgage refinancing. The nation's biggest mortgage lender, Wells Fargo, said its mortgage volume tumbled to $50 billion in that quarter, down 60% from $125 billion a year ago. The second biggest lender, JP Morgan Chase, said its mortgage originations that include new home purchases and refinancings fell 54% to $23.3 billion from $51.2 billion a year ago. Here, the story here is stark. Higher rates have hurt demand, but see, rates aren't even above 5%, but they got down in the 3s, which really stimulated things, and now they're up in the 4s. They're still historically low, but then there's another piece to this. This has happened mostly because federal central bankers last year repeatedly declared a desire to pare back or taper their program to buy $85 billion of mortgage-backed securities and treasury bonds each month to keep interest rates low. They made good on a promise last month, trimming $10 billion from the program. Despite a still anemic job market, most economies think the Fed will trim another $10 billion later this month. So they're pulling off of quantitative easing, and yeah, we're already starting to see the unfortunate effects. See, you can't prop up an economy like ours. Maybe you can for a little bit, but in the bigger picture, it's not going to work. And so we're seeing the mortgage market go, unfortunately, already. One of the first hallmarks. Germany. Let's talk Germany for a minute, because obviously the fight for 15 is going on here in America, and the idea, and it's not a radical one, is that if people work full-time, they should make a living wage. Stick with me now. Conservative Chancellor Angela Merkel, okay, worked with the center-left Social Democrats. That's what I am, okay? Most wages are currently set in negotiation between companies and unions in the country, and there's no statutory minimum. I don't think most people realize that there's no minimum wage in Germany, but they just set a minimum wage. Okay, it's 8.5 euros, which translates to, in America, $11.54 an hour. Here in America, it's $7.25 an hour. This will affect a whopping 17% of all German workers. This is a huge group. It's going to be a gigantic boost to their country. The same thing that we could do here in America, okay? And they've also decided to lower the retirement age. They have said that if you've worked 43 years, you can retire. 45 years. So you could retire at 63. So if you work from 18 to 63, you get to retire, which is going to do another thing. It's going to take a lot of people out of the workforce, and it's going to tighten the labor market, which will then cause the cost of labor to go up again, which will then, again, help the country. The same things that we should do here in America. The lower retirement age for workers that have been working since they were 18 is a very useful lesson that we in America here could learn. One of the more absurd aspects about the retirement age debate that's going on here in America is that people are living longer, and they just might want to keep working, which, by the way, I'm working, and I enjoy working, and quite honestly, I can't wait till I retire. And I don't think I'm alone in that. So here's the ultimate lesson learned. U.S. workers are productive. The United States is a rich country, and a rich country with productive workers should be talking about lowering the retirement age and not raising it. We should also be talking about paying people a living wage because they're working hard and they deserve it. Okay. The Tea Party is as they always are, it seems, planning a revolution. And they've set another date that they would like their revolution to happen. This comes to us from SamuelWard.com. On January 4th, the Save America Foundation announced plans for an American Revolution to take place on, mark your calendars, May 16th, 2014. In an open letter to all Americans across the country from Colonel Harry Riley, the plan to return America to an imaginary fictitious past that never existed is spelled out in length. The mission, quote, restoration of constitutional government, rule of law, freedom, liberty, blah, 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 of the people, by the people, for the people, from despotic and tyrannical federal leadership. Assumptions. You're going to love this. Millions of Americans will participate. Patriots may be killed, wounded, or incarcerated. Concept of operations. Phase 1. Field millions, as many as 10 million, patriots who will assemble in a non-violent, physically unarmed, spiritually and constitutionally armed, okay, fine. Phase 2, 1 million or more of the assembled 10 million must be prepared to stay in D.C. as long as it takes to see Obama, Biden, Reid, McConnell, Boner, Pelosi, and Attorney General Holder removed from office. And it goes on. Phase 3, those with the principles of West, Cruz, Lee, DeMint, Paul, Governor Walker, Sessions, Gowdy, Jordan, Issa will compromise a tribunal and assume positions of authority to convene investigations, recommend appropriate charges against politicians and government employees to the new U.S. Attorney General appointed by the new president. Will this be a cakewalk? No, it will be painful and some people will die. You can hear the audio about this over at Right Wing Watch. Jim Garrow talked about Operation American Spring and how he believes that President Obama wants to murder him on Friday when he was a guest on the Pete Santilli show. You may remember Pete Santilli because he called for the murder of President Obama and also called for Hillary Clinton to be shot in the vagina. Charming group, aren't they? All right. So I wanted to leave you with this last story. And once again, I want to thank you for joining me again here on TFYCPO. I do enjoy doing this every week. This comes to us from the Associated Press. For $19.99. Now, obviously, over in Colorado, much as they've done in Washington, they decriminalized marijuana. Okay, you can now use it recreationally, and obviously in Colorado they're already selling it, and they've sold out. It's going for $500 an ounce and all these other things. It's huge. It's huge for their state. Colorado officials think the difference of a 1/100th of a mile will be enough to stop thieves from stealing mile marker 420 alongside Interstate 70. Here's what they've done. The mile marker 420. And for those of you who don't know, 420 is pot smoker time. I don't know where it originates from, but anyway, so they find this mile 420 sign, and they've been stealing it. And it's becoming expensive, and it's becoming a pain in the neck. So the state has decided to go back 1/100th of a mile, and put up a 419.99 sign. And now people are probably just going to steal that one for fun. Either way, I just think this story is funny. And it's not the first time. About 25 miles from the Kansas border isn't the only place in Colorado with a fractional mile marker. Cameron Pass in Laramie County also has a 68.5 sign after frequent thefts of the mile 69 sign. You can fill in your own joke there. So in closing this week, we will be paying attention to what goes on with the TPP and what happens with net neutrality. And of course, Congress didn't renew emergency unemployment for people. They got together recently, and they came back after the Christmas break, and they tossed some bills around, and then they went home for another week for the MLK holiday without passing anything for people. Obviously, they're going to have to come back pretty quick here, and hopefully they get something passed, because every day that those people aren't receiving those checks, it is absolutely outright hurting the economy. Obamacare, responsible gun owners, the fight for 15 will be bringing you updates on all of it to you in next week's episode. Once again, I want to thank you for joining me. Oh, real quick update. So I was telling you that it looked like OSR, Open Sky Radio, was going to be breaking up or going by the wayside for a little while, and they were going to go ahead and start another radio group, and it looks like that one may stay in place and another one may run just right beside it. So this show would actually probably be carried on both. Obviously, we'll keep you abreast of these developments as they continue to come to us. But it looks like OSR, Open Sky Radio, isn't going to be going away. So good luck to those gentlemen over there. Whatever the heck is going on. We're just glad that we just get to keep going, putting these shows out every week, and entertaining and informing you. We are the fire you can't put out. And I always appreciate you tuning in. And join me next week when we'll get into all of these issues again. Thank you again, and good day.